Obandes, you've returned. Stay close to the light tonight. It is time for chapter 77. Forests at night have a particular quality that daylight does not prepare you for. The familiar shapes of trees become something else after dark. The canopy that filtered pleasant light in the afternoon becomes a ceiling that holds the dark in. The trunks that were simply trunks become shapes that the eye processes differently when the light is low and the mind is tired, and the fire is the only thing between you and the darkness pressing in from all sides. Most people who camp in forests learn to make peace with this, learn to accept that the shapes at the tree line are simply trees, that the dark between them is simply dark, that the forest at night is the same forest it was in the day, simply less visible. But occasionally, on certain nights, in certain parts of the forest where the boundary between the ordinary world and whatever lies beyond it has grown thin, the shapes at the tree line are not what they appear to be. I know this. I have sat beside fires in such forests, and I have learned to count the shapes before the light fades. A group of 4 friends were camping in a forested area in a rural part of Japan, an overnight trip, experienced campers, the kind of people who know how to build a fire and read a trail and sleep comfortably on the ground without complaint. They had chosen their clearing carefully. Good ground, natural shelter, a reasonable distance from the trail. They set up camp in the late afternoon while the light was still good, noted the tree line around the clearing, the particular shapes of the trees at the edge of their space. Tall cedars on the north side, younger mixed growth to the east and west, the clearing well defined, the forest beyond it visible and unremarkable in the late afternoon light. They built their fire and made their evening meal and settled in. And as the light faded and the fire became the primary source of illumination, they began to notice something about the shapes at the tree line. One of them mentioned it first, quietly, not with alarm, simply the casual observation of someone noting something that required explanation. The shapes on the north side of the clearing were different from what they had been in the afternoon, not dramatically different, the same general mass of tree line. But the specific shapes against the night sky were not the same shapes they had seen when the light was good. The silhouettes were wrong, subtly wrong, in the way that something is wrong when it is almost correct, but not quite. The others looked, agreed that the north tree line looked different, offered various explanations, shadows, the particular way firelight affected the perception of shapes at a distance, the natural tendency of tired minds to misread things in low light. They accepted these explanations and returned to their conversation. Then one of them looked at the east tree line and stopped talking. If these stories find their way to you, if you feel drawn back to this quiet room again and again, there is a place for you here. Others have found it. Perhaps you will tell them you did too. The shapes on the east side were also wrong, different from the afternoon, different in the same subtle and persistent way, not moving, simply present in silhouette against the slightly lighter darkness of the sky above the tree line, wrong in their proportions, wrong in the particular way they stood, not the shapes of trees exactly, the shapes of something that was being very still, that had learned to hold a shape that was almost a tree, almost, but not quite. They sat around the fire and looked at the tree line on all sides in turn, north, east, west, all of them different from the afternoon, all of them subtly wrong in the same persistent way. The south side appeared unchanged. They moved to the south side of the fire and sat together and watched the other 3 sides of the clearing and did not speak for a while. Shakkoi, the air at the edges of the clearing, one of them said eventually, cold in a way the fire should have addressed. They decided to sleep in shifts, one person awake at all times, watching the tree line. The first shift passed without incident. The shapes at the tree line did not move, did not change, simply stood at the edge of the clearing with the same persistent wrongness, present, patient, entirely still. The second shift was the same. By the third shift in the early hours, the watcher noticed something that had not been apparent earlier. The shapes were closer, not dramatically closer, not close enough to be certain. But the tree line felt nearer than it had been, as though the clearing had contracted slightly, as though the shapes at its edge had moved forward by a small and careful amount during the hours of the night, maintaining their stillness, their patience, their almost correct silhouettes against the sky, simply closer. He told me this story carefully, in the way of someone who has gone over it many times in their own mind. He said the most unsettling part was not the wrong shapes or the cold air at the edges of the clearing. It was the patience of it. Whatever was standing at that tree line had been there all night, had not rushed, had not approached dramatically, had simply stood and waited, and moved forward by increments so small that each individual movement was deniable. He thought about what that patience meant, about what it was waiting for, about whether it had been waiting for the fire to go out, or for all 4 of them to be asleep simultaneously, or simply waiting in the way that something waits when it has been doing this for long enough that urgency is no longer part of how it operates. He told me he had gone back to that campsite once, several months later, in the middle of the day, with 2 other people. They reached the clearing without difficulty, set up camp, spent a perfectly ordinary night under the stars. He looked at the tree line carefully on both evenings. Nothing unusual. The shapes were trees, clearly and unambiguously trees. He walked the perimeter of the clearing in the daylight and examined each shape he could reach. Wood, bark, branches, everything exactly as a forest should be. He felt the particular mixture of relief and mild foolishness that comes with finding nothing where something was. But on the second morning, breaking camp in the early light, he noticed something at the tree line that made him pause. The grass at the edge of the clearing, at several points around the perimeter, pressed flat, in the particular way that grass is pressed flat when something has been standing on it. For a considerable time, during the night, ndanyaa, the forest remembers where it stood, even when it is no longer standing there. Another whispered story from Japan, shared quietly here beside the kotatsu. If you camp in forest clearings, note the shapes of the tree line before the light fades. Look at them carefully in the daylight while you can see them clearly. Count them if you wish. Note the specific silhouettes, And then when darkness comes and the fire is your only light, look again. If the shapes are the same shapes you noted in the afternoon, you are simply camping in a forest. But if they are different, if the silhouettes against the night sky are subtly wrong in a way you cannot immediately account for, move to the south side of your fire. Keep it burning, sleep in shifts, and in the morning when the light returns and the shapes at the tree line are once again simply trees, look at the grass at the edge of the clearing and note whether it has been pressed flat, in the particular way that grass is pressed flat, when something has been standing on it all night, waiting. If this story stayed with you, if the dark or the shadow feels a little closer tonight, you know where to find me. I am always here, beside the kotatsu, watching, waiting, and if you wish others to find their way here too, I would not object.